I've made a ton of Call of Duty props, but the other day I got a mysterious call that said,
make me an R301, for I am reborn.
Okay. So we got to work on the classic weapon from Apex Legends. We had to cut this one up into 4 pieces to fit onto the printers because this thing turned out pretty large. And when it was all done printing, it was a pretty dang good print. The layer lines were not too bad, so not a ton of work was going to have to be done. The filler primer likely will fill it all up. However, there were a few really rough spots, namely this part on the very end of the stock. It was really rough, and it had a bunch of these just extra lines, and we want that to be smooth. So in this part of the video, I'm going to show you exactly what I did on this one. I'm always learning, trying new things, and this was a very good, simple and easy way to get rid of a ton of that extra material that we don't want. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to give the entire thing a nice once over, or a couple of times, with a low grit sandpaper. I believe I used like an 80 or 120 here. 80 is pretty rough, so don't use it too much unless you're willing to take away a lot of material. But I believe I worked up to a 120, and that was the one that I used most for this first part. This basically is just helping start scuff the surface. It helps the primer adhere better to the plastic, and it starts to get rid of some of those layer lines. And then in our case here, starts to just do some of the work on the problem area. Once that's done, it's time to bring out the Bondo spot filler and putty. You can find this pretty much like at any hardware store. I got this on Amazon. It's pretty readily available, and this is mainly used for automotive filling. I don't believe it's super toxic, but it's always good to wear gloves and a respirator, some eye protection too. Just be safe. Well ventilated areas. Whenever you're using any type of chemicals or stuff like that, it's always best to be safe. I'm guilty of it sometimes, but just protect yourself. I put some of the putty directly onto the piece, and I started out just using my finger, and that worked okay, but it wasn't really making it super smooth, which we will be sanding this, but getting it as smooth as possible off the rip is probably best. So as soon as I got my fingers in there and I was smoothing out, I remembered that I also bought some Bondo brand scrapers, and these are pretty good. If you want to spend the extra money, you definitely can. If not, you can like use your finger or like a piece of like high density foam or something if you have it. Just anything that will help just smooth it out. I didn't do it here, but you can also mix this with a little bit of acetone, and it will make it more of like a paint, like an acrylic paint texture that you can brush on. But in this case, I just used the straight up out of the tube, and it worked great. So we smoothed that out on the surface. You can go a little bit thick here just because we are going to be sanding this, and you want to be above the problem area so that you can sand back down to that area and make it perfectly smooth. So once it's dry, we are going to do exactly that, and we are going to sand. I believe I used like a 320 grit, somewhere like in the middle area with the sandpaper. This stuff sands super easy, and it makes a ton of dust, so just be prepared for that. So again, well ventilated area, somewhere where you do not mind getting a ton of Bondo dust all over. And this is how it looks once you're finished. It's super smooth, and then we are ready for primer. I'm using the Rust-Oleum filler primer 2-in-1. It's super great product, and it helps just get rid of all of those layer lines. So we give it a good spray. Once that's dry, you can definitely go in again with some sandpaper, because this primer is super sandable and it's really nice to work with. In this case, it didn't need a ton. I just basically did a once over with it, and it felt really good. Everything was super smooth. I was really happy with it. So since I was happy with that, I decided on this one to go with a white base coat, and I just did that with some white spray paint. I went with matte. Matte just is way better if you're going to be painting on top of it. If you're painting on gloss, it just tends to not always stick as well. So having that matte finish is super nice when you're working with acrylics on top of it. Once that was dry, we took it inside to our setup here, and we got to painting. I'm not going to show you all of the steps of the painting of this one because truthfully, it's a little repetitive. We went with some pretty basic stuff here. My friend who I made this for, his favorite Bluprint, I think it's Bluprint in Apex, I'm not sure, but his favorite version of the R301 is a white metallic purple gold with a little bit of pink, and that's exactly what we did here. It's not the exact same model, However, I wanted to take some design cues and just some color cues from that. So that's exactly what we did. We started off, I did my base coat of just normal purple, and then we covered that up with 2 different metallic purples to give it a little bit of depth. We also went in and covered the parts that needed to be black, like the handles and stuff like that. We painted that with our black paint as well. We did some gold accents, some pink accents, and it was looking pretty dang good, but it was looking just a little bit too clean here. And so what we did, what I usually do, is do a little bit of dry brushing at the end. And this is where we use just a little bit of paint on a dry brush, and we just basically brush that all over the areas. We usually do it like on some edges and corners and stuff like that, and it just helps accentuate those areas, and it makes it look a little bit battle worn or damaged and stuff like that. It adds a little bit of character to the piece, because a lot of these guns, you just don't want it to be just perfect. Once I was satisfied with it all, I sealed it with a matte varnish, and we were left with this. I love the way it turned out. I think this print and paint job really is pretty sweet. So if you want to see more Apex stuff, let me know in the comments, and be sure to sub to the channel, like the video. It really helps push this out to more people. It's been amazing, so I appreciate you guys being here, and time to get this in the hands of its rightful owner.